Imagine being handed to the most dangerous man in Sicily to pay off a debt you didn't create, in a wedding dress that wasn't even bought for you. A room full of people in diamonds decides you're nothing the second you walk in. They mock your dress. They don't bother to learn your name. They seat you at the far end of the table below everyone because they've already decided exactly who you are. But they're about to be very, very wrong. Because the quiet bride with her head down can read something none of them can. And the one number she finds hidden in this family's books is going to expose a traitor, end a war, and make the coldest man in the room look at her like she's the only person alive. This is the story of the woman everyone overlooked, and the mafia boss who finally saw her. Before we begin, if you love dark romance and mafia stories where the woman is never just a damsel, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button and tap the like, because it genuinely helps these stories reach more people who'd love them and stay until the very end. Because the secret of who really destroyed her father changes everything. Now, dim the lights. Get comfortable. Let's begin. Act 1: The Sale. The first thing Mia Caruso learned about the Vitali villa was that even the silence had rules. She felt it the moment the black car slowed at the iron gates, the headlights sweeping across men with guns who did not blink. Rain ran down the windows in long silver threads, blurring the cypress trees into smears of ink. Somewhere ahead, the house waited 3 stories of pale stone glowing gold from within candlelight in every window, beautiful, the way a blade is beautiful. She had been told not to speak unless spoken to. She had been told to keep her eyes down. She had been told that her father's life now lived inside her good behavior, and that one wrong breath could end it. She believed all of it. The car stopped. A man opened her door without looking at her face, and the rain came in cold against her cheek. She gathered the hem of the wedding dress, a second-hand thing, ivory, gone faintly yellow at the seams, bought by an aunt who cried while she paid for it, and she stepped out into the gravel courtyard of the most dangerous family in Sicily. Inside, the violence was quieter and far worse. They walked her down a corridor lined with old portraits, men with the same heavy brows and the same patient cruelty in their eyes, and into a dining hall where 40 people turned to look at her at once. Crystal, candle smoke, the smell of wine and gun oil and lilies. The women wore diamonds that could have paid her father's debt 10 times over. The men wore the bored expressions of people who had stopped being surprised by anything, including death. Nobody asked her name. A woman in emerald silk leaned to another and murmured behind her glass loud enough to be a gift. That's the bride. They could have at least bought her a dress that fit. Laughter soft as falling ash. Mia kept her head down. She had become very good at that, at making herself small, at folding her shoulders inward until people forgot she was a person and treated her like furniture. It was a skill she had learned long before tonight, in a different house, watching a different kind of man drink himself toward a debt that would one day be hers. She did not look up, which is why she heard him before she saw him. The room changed temperature. The laughter died, not slowly, but all at once, the way birdsong stops when a hawk crosses the sky. Chairs scraped. Glasses were set down. A hush fell so complete, she could hear the candle flames breathe. Don Damiano. She lifted her eyes only as far as the floor would allow, and she saw his shoes first, black, immaculate, soundless on the marble. Then the line of a dark suit cut close to a body built for stillness. Then, against every instruction, her gaze climbed all the way to his face. Damiano Vitali was younger than she'd expected and colder than she'd feared. He could not have been more than 34, but he wore power like something he'd been born inside of a second skin. His face was all clean angles and shadow, a faint scar threading his left eyebrow, his mouth a flat line that had clearly forgotten how to soften. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Dark, unhurried, terribly calm. The eyes of a man who had watched terrible things happen and had often been the reason. He looked at the room the way a landlord looks at a property. He did not look at her at all. "This is the Caruso girl," said the man at his side. Older, silver at the temples, a warm uncle's smile that did not match the room. "Aldo Caruso's daughter, the arrangement we discussed. I know who she is, Zio." Damiano's voice was quiet. It did not need to be loud. "Sit her down. We'll do this after the meal." This, as though she were a contract to be signed, as though the wedding that would happen in an hour in the family chapel before a priest who looked too frightened to bless anything were a line item on the night's agenda, somewhere between the wine and the espresso. They sat her at the far end of the table, below everyone in the seat where you put a guest you intend to forget. A plate appeared in front of her. She did not eat. She folded her trembling hands in her lap, and she did what she always did when the world tried to make her disappear. She listened, and the Vitale family, certain that the frightened girl in the cheap dress understood nothing, talked. They talked about shipments and percentages, about a port in Naples and a problem in Catania, about money the way only people drowning in it can. Most of it was noise, but Mia had a strange and specific gift, the gift that had once made her father proud, and had then, in a way she did not yet understand, gotten him destroyed. Numbers arranged themselves in her mind, whether she wanted them to or not. She heard a figure for a shipment, and a figure for its cost, and the space between them was wrong. Not by a little, by a margin so clean and so deliberate that it could only be a hand, a thief's hand smoothing the books. She filed it away the way she filed everything in the quiet cabinet behind her eyes, and she kept her head down. Across the room for 1/2 second, the cold Don's gaze drifted to the forgotten end of his own table and found a bride who was not crying, not trembling at the food, but listening, calculating, her lips moving very slightly as if doing arithmetic in the dark. He looked away, but something in him, some animal part, trained to notice the one detail that did not belong, made a small note of its own. They married her in the chapel at midnight. It rained the whole time. The priest's voice shook. Damiano said his words like a man reading a verdict, and when the moment came, he slid a ring onto her finger that was so heavy and so old it felt like a manacle, warmed by other women's hands. She said "I do" to the floor. He did not kiss her. He simply looked down at her bowed head for a long moment, and then he turned and walked out into the rain, and the bodyguards walked her the other way, to a room at the top of the house with a lock on the outside of the door. She stood alone in her second-hand dress in a stranger's mansion, and she pressed her back against the cold wall, and she let herself shake exactly once, to one full-body tremor, the fear pouring out, and then sealing back over like water, closing above a stone. Then she straightened. She wiped her face. She walked to the window and looked out at the black coastline and the rain, and she made herself a promise in a voice too low for anyone to hear. "I am going to learn this house. I am going to learn every room and every man and every lie in it, and I am going to walk out of it alive." She did not yet know that the lie she had overheard at dinner would be the thing that saved her. She did not yet know that the man who had refused to look at her was about to become the most dangerous obsession of her life. She only knew the numbers were wrong, and Mia Caruso had never in her life been able to leave a wrong number alone. Act 2, the number. For 9 days, the Vitale villa treated her as scenery. She learned its rhythms the way she'd once learned ledgers, patiently, invisibly building a model in her mind. Breakfast at 8 served to no one in particular. The garden men who were not gardeners. The black cars that came and went at hours that meant trouble. Rosa, the old housekeeper with flour on her hands and grief in her eyes, who was the only person in the house who said good morning to her, like she was real. And Salvatore Zio, Salvatore the smiling uncle, the consigliere who appeared in doorways more often than a busy man, stood watching Mia with an attention so warm it made her cold. "You're settling in," he said to her on the 4th day, finding her in the library where she had taken to hiding. "Good. Damiano is not an easy man, but he is a fair one." He smiled. "Your father would be glad you're safe." She thanked him with her eyes down. Inside the cabinet behind her eyes opened a drawer and laid the moment inside, because there had been something underneath the kindness. A checking. A man making sure a door he had locked was still locked. She did not understand it yet. She would. Damiano she saw rarely and never alone. He moved through his own house like weather felt before, seeing the whole staff bending around his passage. Twice she caught him watching her from across a room with that flat, unreadable patience, and both times she dropped her gaze first, and both times she felt the look stay on her skin like a hand long after he'd gone. She told herself it was fear. She was almost honest enough to know it was not only fear. On the 9th night, the house caught fire from the inside, not with flame, but with money. She heard it through the floor. Raised voices in the study below her room, the particular pitch of powerful men who have just discovered they have been robbed. She lay very still and listened the way she always listened. And she pieced it together from the fragments that climbed up through the old stone. A buyer in Marseille paid in full. A shipment that never arrived. 2 million euros gone into air. And beneath the shouting, Damiano's voice not raised, never raised, but gone so cold it frightened her more than any scream, saying the same thing over and over in different shapes. "The books are clean. I checked them myself. The books are clean, and the money is gone. And that is not possible. But it was possible. Mia knew exactly how it was possible because she had spent her childhood at her father's elbow learning the 100 quiet ways a number can be made to lie. You did not steal from the total. You stole from the spaces, the rounding, the timing, the gaps between when money was promised and when it moved. You made the books balance perfectly beautifully, and you walked out the back of the math with your pockets full. Whoever was robbing the Vitale family was not a thief. He was an artist, and he was someone with the access to keep the books clean while he did it. She lay awake until the house went quiet, and then she lay awake longer, fighting herself. Say nothing, the survivor in her insisted. Frightened brides survive. Useful brides get used, and then buried with what they know. But there was the other thing in her. The thing her father had put there. The thing that had no instinct for survival at all. Only an unbearable, lifelong inability to watch a lie sit in a column of numbers and do nothing. In the morning, she went down to the study. He was alone, which she had not expected. Damiano stood at the window with his back to the door, a glass of something amber, untouched in his hand, the dawn turning the sea to hammered tin behind him. Ledgers lay open across the great desk, real ones, leather and paper the old way, because men like the Vitales trusted ink over anything a hard drive could be made to forget. He did not turn when she entered. He simply said in that low, even voice, "No one comes into this room." "I know." Her own voice surprised her by not shaking. "I'm sorry. I'll go." But before I do, she made herself say it. "The money you lost. The 2 million. I think I can tell you where it went." Now he turned, and for the first time since the iron gates, Damiano Vitale truly looked at her. Not at the cheap dress, not at the bowed head, not at the contract she represented, but at the woman standing in his doorway with her chin up and a terrified, defiant clarity in her eyes. She watched the recalculation move through him, swift and silent the way it moved through her around numbers. "Explain," he said. So she crossed the room past every instinct, screaming at her to stay small, and she stood at his desk and she turned the nearest ledger toward herself and she began to read. It took her 4 minutes. He stood beside her the whole time, close enough that she could feel the cold coming off him like a window in winter. And she made herself ignore it, made herself disappear into the only place she had ever felt. Completely safe. The inside of the math. "Here," she said finally, and pressed one fingertip to a line. "And here, and here. 3 entries weeks apart, each one perfect, each one balanced, each one wrong. These shipments are real. The costs are real. But the exchange rate used to convert the Marseille payment is from a Tuesday. The payment cleared on a Thursday. 2 days. On a sum this size, the difference is enormous, and it's been routed into a holding account every time. And then the account is zeroed before the quarter closes, so it never shows on the summary you read." She looked up at him. "You checked the totals. The totals are honest. The theft is in the timing. Whoever did this didn't break your books." He composed them. The silence that followed was the longest of her life. Damiano did not look at the ledger. He looked at her. The flat calm of his face had not changed, but his eyes had something had come alive behind them. Sharp and bright and almost hungry. The look of a man who has been alone in the dark for a long time and has just heard another person breathing. "Who taught you to read a book like that?" he asked quietly. "My father." The word cost her. "Aldo Caruso. He was a bookkeeper, a real one." She swallowed. "Before he gambled it all away, he was the best I ever saw. He used to say numbers can't lie, only liars can, and a good accountant learns to hear the difference." She lowered her gaze at last, the old habit catching her. "I'm only telling you so you know I'm not guessing. Look at me." She looked at him. "In this house," Damiano said very softly, "you will never again look at the floor when you speak to me. Do you understand?" She did not understand. Not yet, but she nodded. He set down the untouched glass. He stepped back from her, restoring the space between them with deliberate care, like a man stepping back from a fire he has decided not to put out. "My uncle keeps these books," he said. "Salvatore. He has kept them for 20 years. He is the only man alive my father trusted with them." A pause waited. "You are telling me they are wrong." "I'm telling you what the numbers are telling me," she said. "I'm not telling you who's holding the pen." It was the most honest thing she could have said, and she watched it land. Watched him register that she was clever enough to see exactly where this pointed, and careful enough not to point there for him. Respect moved across his face there, and gone, but she caught it. "Stay," he said. "We are going to read every book in this room. You and I. He pulled out the chair at his own desk, his chair, the Don's chair, and gestured for her to sit in it. And no one is to know what you can do. No one. Especially not my uncle. His eyes held hers. Can you keep yourself invisible, Mia Caruso? The corner of her mouth moved not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. The first in 9 days. Don Damiano, she said. I've been invisible my whole life. I'm very good at it. For one breathless second, something flickered at the edge of his mouth too. Then it was gone, and he was the cold Don again, and she was the forgotten bride, and the two of them bent together over the lie in the books, while the dawn climbed the walls closer than they had any business, being a thief somewhere in the house above them, and neither of them yet willing to name the thing that had just begun. ACT3, the thief in the house. They worked in secret in the dead hours. By day, Mia resumed her costume, the quiet bride eyes lowered, drifting through the villa like a draft. She let the women in emerald and diamonds keep mocking her at lunch. She let Salvatore keep finding her in doorways with his warm, checking smile. She made herself smaller than ever because she understood now that her smallness was a weapon, and a weapon is only useful if no one knows you're holding it. By night, the Don's study became a country of two. He would send the house to sleep and then come for her himself. A soft knock at the outside locked door that he had quietly ordered. Left unlocked, and they would descend through the silent villa to the room full of ledgers, and they would read. Hour after hour, box after box of old accounts hauled up from the vault. She taught him to see what she saw. The timing, thefts, the ghost accounts, the elegant wrongness threaded through 20 years of perfect books, and he learned with a speed that startled her, his mind closing around each new pattern. Like a trap. And somewhere in those hours in the candlelight, with the sea breathing against the rocks below, the temperature between them began very slowly to change. It was nothing she could have pointed to. It was the way he started setting a second espresso beside her, without being asked. The way he stopped sitting across the desk and started sitting beside her, their shoulders a careful inch apart, and how that inch began to feel like the loudest thing in the room. The way she caught him watching her hands move down a column, not the numbers, her hands, and the way he looked away when she noticed. The first ungoverned thing she had ever seen him do. You don't trust me, she said one night, 3 weeks in, not looking up from the page. You're using me. I know that. It's all right. I'd use me too. The pen stopped in his hand. Is that what you think this is? I think a man like you doesn't have friends. He has assets. She turned a page. I'm a good asset. I'm not insulted. He was quiet for so long she finally lifted her eyes and found him looking at her with an expression that undid something in her chest, something stitched closed a long time ago. My father was murdered in this room, Damiano said. She went still. 8 months ago. He was sitting in that chair. He nodded at the great chair she now sat in every night. They said it was the De Luca family, a war we'd been losing for 2 years without understanding why we were bleeding money. We should have had to fight it. His voice did not rise. It never rose. But there was a current under it now, dark and fast. I took his seat. I buried him. And every month since the empire he built has been dying in my hands, and I could not find the wound. I checked everything. I trusted the books because my uncle kept them, and I trusted my uncle because he raised me. He set the pen down with terrible gentleness, and then a frightened girl in a borrowed dress walked into my study and found in 4 minutes the thing I have been hunting for 8 months. He looked at her, and for the length of one breath, the cold Don was simply a young man who had been very alone for a very long time. So no, Mia, you are not an asset. The word was quiet, almost rough. You are the only person in my life I did not inherit. The only one I chose to keep in this room. A pause. I do not know yet what that makes you, but it is not an asset. The candle guttered between them. The space he had so carefully kept all those nights had narrowed without either of them moving. She could see the faint scar through his eyebrow, the exhaustion he hid from everyone, the want he was holding back with both hands. His gaze dropped to her mouth just once helplessly, and then he stood abruptly and crossed to the window and put the whole room between them. It's late, he said to the glass. You should sleep. She sat there with her heart slamming and understood with the clean certainty she usually reserved for numbers. 2 things at once, that she was in terrible danger, and that the danger was no longer the kind she had walked in fearing. The danger she had walked in fearing arrived 4 nights later with guns. They came at the harbor warehouse, the De Luca family, in 3 cars, while Damiano was meeting a shipment, and Mia, against every protest, sat in the armored sedan in the lot, because he had refused that night to let her out of his sight and refused equally to say why. She heard the first shot as a flat crack that did not sound like the movies. Then the world came apart. Muzzle flashes strobing in the dark, men shouting in two dialects, the windshield of the car ahead of her exploding into a sheet of white. She did what her body decided for her. She dropped low across the seat heart, a fist against her ribs, and through the door she heard Damiano's voice, that impossible calm, giving orders in the middle of hell. And then the sedan door was wrenched open and a hand closed around her arm and hauled her out into the noise, and she nearly screamed before she saw it was him. "Stay behind me." Blood on his sleeve, not his. A gun in his other hand. "Whatever happens, you stay behind me." What happened next would live in her for the rest of her life. He moved her across that open lot through gunfire with his own body turned to the threat the entire way. A wall of him between her and every flash in the dark. Never once putting himself behind her. Never once flinching a man who feared. Nothing arranging his whole body around the single project of keeping her alive. A round struck the steel container beside her head with a sound like a bell, and he pulled her down and covered her completely, his arms a cage, and his heartbeat hammering against her back. And in the middle of the worst violence she had ever seen, Mia Caruso felt the most absurd and terrifying thing she had ever felt. Safe. When his men finished it and they finished it, the lot went silent except for the sea and someone groaning, and the rain starting again. He did not let her go right away. He held her there in the wet, and the cordite a half second too long, his face buried near her hair, his breath ragged for the first time since she'd known him. Then he stood and pulled her up and held her by both shoulders and looked her over for wounds with a focus that bordered on madness. "You're not hurt." It was not a question. He needed it to be a fact. "Tell me you're not hurt." "I'm not hurt." Her voice shook. His hands, she realized, were shaking too. "Damiano, your arm. It's nothing." He was still searching her face. Rain ran down both of them. Behind him, his men were watching their Don kneel in concern over the forgotten bride, and she saw them see it, saw the news of it travel from face to face. "Something has changed." "It's nothing," he said again, softer, and for 1 second his forehead came down against hers, the two of them breathing the same wet air, and neither of them moved. Then he gathered himself back into stone and stood, and the moment sealed over. But it was too late, and they both knew it. You cannot put a man's body between yourself and death and walk away unchanged. You cannot feel a feared man's hands shake over your survival and pretend you felt nothing. In the car, back in the dark, his hand found hers on the seat between them and did not let go the entire drive, and he stared straight ahead the whole way, jaw tight, as if holding her hand were a war he was losing on purpose. The next morning she found the photographs. She had gone looking for an old account book in a storeroom off the study, and behind it in a flat steel case she opened without thinking she found instead a different kind of record. Photographs. Dozens of them. Surveillance shots, long lens time-stamped of her. Mia at the window of her locked room. Mia in the garden. Mia from the weeks before the wedding, leaving the small apartment she'd shared with her aunt, buying bread, sitting alone in a cafe reading a paperback, not knowing she was watched. Someone had been watching her for months. Before any of this, before the debt came due, her blood went cold. She was still standing there, the photos trembling in her hand, when she heard the study door open behind her, and she turned, expecting Damiano. It was Salvatore. "Ah," the uncle said, and his warm smile did not reach his eyes, had perhaps never reached his eyes. He shut the door behind him with a soft and final click. "I'd hoped to have this conversation later, but you've always been ahead of schedule, haven't you, Mia? Just like your father." The way he said her father's name turned the floor to water beneath her. "You knew him," she said. "I ended him." Salvatore crossed to the desk, unhurried, a man entirely at ease. "Your father was the Vitali family's accountant for 19 years. A genius in his small way. The only man besides me who could read a book the way you read it last night." He picked up a candlestick, examined it, set it down. 11 years ago he found a discrepancy, a timing theft, mine. He came to me first out of loyalty. Can you imagine to ask if I knew anything about it before he troubled the old Don? A thin smile. I thanked him for his discretion. And then I spent the next year very carefully drowning him. A loan he didn't take. A debt he couldn't prove was forged. A reputation, a marriage, a mind. All of it gone until he was just a drunk. No one would believe raving about numbers. He looked at her, and the warmth was entirely gone now, scraped down to the cold thing that had always lived beneath it. I kept the loose thread, though. The daughter. The one who used to sit at his elbow. I watched you for years, Mia, waiting to see if you'd inherited the dangerous part of him. And when Damiano's father died and the boy needed a wife to look respectable and weak, he spread his hands. I arranged a debt, and I offered him a quiet, broken little bride who'd keep her head down and see nothing. His smile returned terrible now. I put you in this house myself. The one place I could keep my eye on, the only person left alive who might read my books. The whole shape of it dropped into place in her mind with an awful, perfect click. The watching, the checking in doorways, the locked door. You've been stealing from Damiano, she breathed, feeding it to the De Luca family. You're the war, you're the bleeding. You killed his father. His father was going to find it too. Eventually. He was slower than your father, but not slow enough. Salvatore sighed, almost regretful. And now, here you are, having found in 3 weeks what I hid in plain sight for 20 years. You understand I can't allow that. He reached into his coat. And Mia Caruso, the forgotten bride, the frightened girl, the furniture, did the thing no one in that house had ever once imagined she might do. She moved first. Act 4. The bride who read the books. She did not run. Running was what he expected, what the small, broken girl in his mind would do. Instead, she swept the heavy ledger off the desk and into his arm as it came up, and the gun discharged into the floor, deafening. And in the half-second of his surprise, she did the only truly violent thing she had ever done in her life. She seized the candlestick and brought it across his wrist, with everything she had, and the gun spun away across the marble. Then she ran, not for the door, for the truth, for the small steel case of evidence she had spent 3 weeks assembling with Damiano, the photographs, the ledgers, all of it snatched up against her chest as she crashed out of the study and into the great hall where, by the mercy of timing, the family had gathered for the midday meal. 40 faces turned, the women in their diamonds, the men with their bored, cruel eyes, and at the head of the table, Damiano, rising already at the sound of the shot, his face going white when he saw her blood on her arm. Now, where a splinter of the floor had caught her, the front of her dress torn, she did not bow her head. She walked the length of that table, the table where they had seated her below everyone, where they had decided she was nothing, and she reached the head of it, and she slammed the open ledger down in front of all of them, her hand pressed flat against the page, and she spoke in a voice that did not shake at all. Everyone in this house has spent 2 years asking why the Vitali family is dying. She was breathing hard. Her hand bled onto the ivory of her sleeve. I can tell you, it took me 3 weeks. It would have taken any of you the same if a single one of you had ever once looked at me long enough to think I could read. Salvatore appeared in the hall doorway, nursing his wrist, his composure cracking. She's hysterical. Page 204, Mia said, and turned it, and pointed. The Marseille account, the timing theft, the exchange rate from the wrong day every quarter for 20 years routed into a holding account that zeros before the books close. She turned more pages faster, her father's gift pouring out of her like floodwater through a broken dam. Page 60, page 91. The Catania shipment that paid for itself twice. The De Luca payments, hidden as freight costs here and here because the man feeding your enemies the money to kill you has been sitting at this table the whole time, smiling at all of you, signing the very books that prove it. She lifted her eyes and fixed them at last on Salvatore. He killed Don Aldo. He destroyed my father 11 years ago for finding exactly this, and he married me into this house so he could keep watch on the one person left who might find it again. Her voice dropped and the whole hall leaned in despite themselves. He was almost right about me. I am very easy to overlook, but I am my father's daughter, and numbers cannot lie. Only liars can. The silence in that hall was the silence of 40 people watching the ground move under a man they had trusted their whole lives. Damiano picked up the ledger. He read it standing in front of everyone, while the rain started again against the tall windows, and Mia watched the truth go into him line by line. Every betrayal, every stolen million, every drop of his father's blood, and she watched the cold dawn. She had married become in real time something far more frightening than cold. When he set the book down, he was very calm. He was calm the way the sea is calm in the half hour before it takes a coast apart. Salvatore, he said quietly. Zio. He came around the table. You held me at my father's funeral. You told me grief makes a man see thieves where there are none. You told me to trust the books. He stopped in front of the man who had raised him. You told me to trust you, Damiano. For the first time, Salvatore's voice had fear in it. Whatever that girl thinks she sees, I have served this family for 40 years. You served yourself for 40 years, Damiano said, and you charged us for the privilege. And then the thing Mia had only glimpsed at the harbor came all the way out of him, not loud, never loud, but absolute. You killed my father in the chair I sit in, and you put your hand on my wife to keep your secret. It was the first time he had called her his wife. What happened in the next several minutes Mia would not describe to anyone for the rest of her life. There are kinds of justice that belong to the world the Vitales lived in, and she had married into that world, and she did not look away from it because she had promised herself she would never again pretend not to see what was in front of her. Salvatore's men, summoned by some silent signal, found that the room had already turned against them. The De Luca alliance, exposed, collapsed in a single afternoon of phone calls and worse. By nightfall, the war that had been bleeding the Vitale family for 2 years was simply over-ended, not by a bigger army, but by a bride who could read. But that was not the climax. The climax came later in the dark when it nearly took her after all. Act 5, the thing he couldn't lose. Salvatore had one move left, and he made it the way cornered men do without sense, only spite. He took her from the garden at dusk. She had gone out for air, finally able to breathe, the long horror of the day draining out of her under a bruised violet sky, and a hand closed over her mouth. And a car was waiting, and the world narrowed to the cold circle of a gun against her ribs, and Salvatore's voice unraveled, now wet with ruin in her ear. If I lose everything, Cara, then so does he. And he loses it the same way I did, watching the one thing he couldn't replace disappear. They drove to the cliffs. The abandoned chapel on the headland where the Vitales had buried their dead for 100 years, stone falling into the sea. He meant to do it there, she understood. He meant it to be found. He meant it to break Damiano the way Damiano had broken him. What Salvatore did not understand, what none of them had ever understood, was that the frightened girl had spent 3 weeks memorizing every road, every property, every safe house in the ledgers she'd read. The way she memorized everything. She knew exactly where he was taking her before he did. And she knew, because she had read the books, that this chapel had a number 2. It was wired with the family's oldest alarm, a tripwire from her father's era, long forgotten by everyone. Everyone except the daughter of the man who'd installed it. She let Salvatore drag her inside. She let him talk because frightened men who win like to talk, and every second he talked was a second she used to work her bleeding hand free of his grip and reach in the dark for the rusted panel by the broken altar that she alone in all the world still knew was there. She tripped the alarm at the exact moment he raised the gun. The chapel screamed a wail of old electronics across the headland, and in the half-second it bought her, she threw herself sideways into the dark between the tombs, and the shot went wide. And then there were headlights, a wall of them, black SUVs, pouring up the cliff road faster than should have been possible. Because Damiano Vitale had not for one single hour since the harbor let her out of his protection. Because there had been a man watching the garden. Because the moment she vanished, he had already been coming, breaking every speed the road allowed, calling her name into a phone she couldn't answer. He came through the chapel doors covered in the rain, and the blood of the men who'd tried to slow him, and Mia would remember it always. The most feared man in Sicily, standing in the ruin of an abandoned church lit by headlights and lightning, finding her alive among the graves and breaking openly in front of his men. The cold gone, the stone gone, every wall she'd watched him build crashing down at once. Salvatore turned the gun on him, and Mia from the dark threw the only thing. She had the rusted iron candle stand from the altar, and it caught the old man across the back of the skull, and the shot went up into the broken roof. And then Damiano's men were on him, and it was finished. Truly finished. For good. Damiano crossed the chapel and dropped to his knees in front of her, where she sat against a tomb, and he took her face in both his bloody hands, as though she were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. I had him, she said, and started finally to shake. I had it handled. I tripped the alarm. I knew about the alarm because my father, I know. His voice was wrecked. I know you did. You don't need me, Mia. You never needed me. I watched you walk the length of that table today and end a war 40 grown men couldn't end, and you didn't need a single one of us. His thumbs moved over her cheeks. That's not why I came. He pressed his forehead to hers, and there, in the candleless dark, The man who had refused to look at her on their wedding night finally said the thing he'd been losing the war against for weeks. I came because the thought of a world without you in it does something to me. I cannot survive. I came because somewhere between the books and the harbor and tonight you stopped being the woman I was tricked into marrying and became the only thing in my entire life I would burn the whole world down to keep. His voice cracked clean through. I am not asking you to need me. I'm telling you that I, the great Don Vitale, who needs no one, I need you. And it terrifies me more than any gun ever has. She looked at him at the blood and the rain and the unbearable open want in the face of a man who had never in his life been open about anything. And the survivor in her, the one who'd kept her small and safe and invisible for 26 years, finally quietly stood down. Damiano, she said, you can let me sit in your chair. You can read the books with me every night for the rest of our lives. You can put your whole body between me and the world 1,000 more times. She closed the last of the distance herself, this time on her own terms with full agency because she had decided it and stopped a breath from his mouth. But the next time you want to kiss me, you don't get to stop. He didn't. Epilogue, the woman they overlooked. They did not have a second wedding. Mia refused it. The first one had been a sale and she would not let it be erased. She would let it be answered. So instead, on a clear evening a year later, in the candlelit dining hall of the Vitale villa, the family gathered again at the long table, and this time Mia Caruso did not sit below everyone. She sat at the head of it, beside the Don, in the chair that mattered. The women who had mocked her second-hand dress now waited to see where her eyes landed before they spoke. The men who had decided she was furniture now brought their disputed numbers to her, because everyone in Palermo knew now that the Don's wife could read a lie in any ledger ever written, and that the surest way to lose everything was to put a false figure in front of la Contessa dei Conti da Dilla, Countess of the Books, they called her, half in fear and half in something close to awe. Damiano watched her down the length of the table sometimes, the way he had that very first night, except now when she caught him looking, neither of them looked away. You're doing arithmetic again, he murmured to her once late, the two of them alone in the study that had become theirs. The ledgers open the sea breathing against the rocks below. Your lips move. I can always tell. There's a discrepancy in the Naples account. She didn't look up. 40,000 euros. Someone's testing us. Then someone is about to learn what the last man learned. He set a second espresso beside her, without being asked the way he always had since the very first night, and he sat down close, no careful inch between them anymore, and he picked up a pen. Show me. And Mia Caruso, the bride they sold in a second-hand dress, the girl the world had built its whole life around, overlooking, pressed one fingertip to the lie hidden in the numbers, lifted her chin and showed the most dangerous man in Sicily exactly where to look. Outside, the rain came in off the black coastline, soft against the glass. Inside, in the candlelight, the man who frightened everyone leaned close to the only person who had never once been afraid of him for the right reasons. And for the first time in the long, bloody history of that house, the books were honest. The war was over, and the woman no one had bothered to see was the most powerful person in the room. She had walked into that villa with her head down in a dress that didn't fit, carrying nothing but her father's gift and a promise made to an empty window. She walked through the rest of her life with her head up, and the world that had overlooked her never made that mistake again. The end. And that is the story of the bride they sold. In a second-hand dress, the woman the whole world overlooked, who walked into that villa with her head down and walked out of it as the most powerful person in the room. If this story gave you chills, if you felt your heart race when Damiano put his body between her and those bullets, or when Mia slammed that ledger down in front of the entire family and refused to bow her head one more time, then do me a quick favor. Tap that like button right now. It tells me you want more stories exactly like this one. Share this video with that one friend who is obsessed with dark romance and mafia. Love stories, you know exactly who she is. Send it to her. She'll thank you. And comment below, because I genuinely read these. I want to know, at what exact moment did you fall for Damiano? Was it the harbor, the chapel, the line where he finally said he needed her? Tell me, and tell me if you saw the twist about her father coming or if it caught you completely off guard. Now here's the fun part. I'm already writing the next stories and you get to help choose what comes next. Which one do you want first? Drop the number in the comments. The night shift waitress hiding scarred wrists, who turns out to be the one person who can save the mafia boss's dying man in 60 seconds. The quiet pianist, trembling at his underground club every night, who's secretly hacking his entire empire in the dark. The ER nurse on the worst night of her life. And the child sleeping in her car who has the Mafia Boss's eyes. Vote in the comments. Whichever number wins, I'll write that one next, and I'll pin the winner so you don't miss it. And if you're new here, this channel is one thing and one thing only: the woman everyone overlooked and the dangerous man who finally saw her every single week. So subscribe and turn on the bell, because the next story drops soon. And trust me, you do not want to miss who he is.